Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hour late here start, but started nonetheless on a Monday. Hope you all are doing very well. I think we're in for an exciting fall, not only in the Bitcoin world, but in the geopolitical world. I'll talk a little bit about that. War continues to come home to Russia. Ukrainians are doing the right thing, all they can, to secure their country and their freedom. Still not attacking civilian infrastructure the way that Russia attacks maternity wards, hospitals, kindergartens. But let's look at some charts really quick to try to explain where I think we are and what I think could be happening. So I'm going to show some stocks, traditional stocks. This is log scale. Big drop here when the metaverse failed. 2022. Amazing comeback. But if you look at the slope of this price, obviously it's quite clear, even with the huge volatile, scary drops. Facebook is on an exponential trend. All right, it's a straight line on log scale. How do I show that? Well, let's draw an exponential trend. Okay. So this is a weekly chart, so it's just every week on a Wednesday, but by and large, the trend cuts right through. Now, it's not a great predictor of price at any given time, right? I mean, we're quite a bit over the trend at the moment for Facebook. Trend is 610, actual price 733. So you need to do more analysis, right? If you want to try to figure out where Facebook could go, and obviously you have these huge drops, you can have these huge bouts in volatility and unsustainability. The trends can break down very hard. Again, I'm not a TA guy. It's obvious, all right? But now let's try to shoehorn in a power curve, all right? Now, actually, I've talked to Fernando from the Bitcoin Libertarian, I believe, the show. They're based in Hong Kong. And he mentioned that Facebook is growing on a power trend. I think there might be a better case if you measured, say, from this dip. You can kind of see more of a gradual curve here. But I think if you take it far enough, it's still not exhibiting a power. But I'll show you exactly that. Let's just try to shoehorn all this data in with a power trend. All right, which is what Bitcoin does. There we go. All right, so all I'm doing is taking the same data, the same input, and I'm saying, okay, well, what if Facebook was running on a power trend? How would it look? And this is how it looks. All right, so let's take off the exponential. Okay, you kind of can catch it, right, a little bit. It's not terrible. But now, instead of being only 100 and change dollars over the trend line, all right, which is what number one is, we're now double, more than double the trend if you look at the power curve. So that's not really, I'd say, a great fit for Facebook. All right, now let's project it out. Major differences. Like, this is where it's really important to understand how different these trend lines are. And you better kind of get which one is, you better get with the program as far as which trend is the correct one if you want to sort of understand where it could go. All right. So it takes, in another 8 years, roughly, I was going to say 10x difference, but it's not. You got to go, let's see. You got to go out maybe, over 10 years. But over 10 years, look at that difference in price. It's 10x apart. Okay. Notice I have the growth rates here. All right. So when you have an exponential curve, the CAGR is constant. It's just 23%. 23%, 23%, 23, wherever you pick it on the curve, the growth rate from a year before is going to be 23%. 0.1%. That's the growth of Facebook. Now, if you do a power curve, that growth rate is not constant. Now, my tooltip is not as dynamic as I'd like it to be. I'm only showing the trailing 12 months, as in basically from today. So if you look at on a trend, the 337, all right, in October 2025, October 22nd. Now let's go to, so the trend line growth, it's 338 is the value, all right. Go back to 2024, October, roughly. It's just roughly, it's a weekly chart, so it's roughly here, all right, 318. So 318 to 338, that's a 6.4% TTM. It's much softer growth, and it's only going to get softer from here. All right, it's faster at the beginning, softer at the end. You just have to plug the numbers in to understand, what it could be doing. So we're trying to shoehorn in a power curve onto a stock, and stocks are never in power; they're always exponential. So here's the difference. So it's clear that Meta is an exponential trend. Let's look at Apple. Same thing. Apple was arguably almost bankrupt at this point in the 90s. Major issues before Jobs came back and sort of revitalized it with the iPod and everything. But isn't it interesting that no matter how far back we go, we can more or less shoehorn in a trend line that makes sense, and it's exponential. Now, again, I like to talk about Jim Simons a lot. May he rest in peace. His company, Renaissance Capital, as far as I understand it, was probably the best in the stock world of picking the trends and statistically seeing where it was going to go. They were stats guys. So I imagine when they found like a trend, and Apple really started to do something sort of different from here, from about 2005. You can clearly see that, not only did it catch up to this trend, but it's higher than it now. So that notice the 21.3% CAGR. Again, that's the slope of this trend since the 80s. It's actually since the 2000s even faster because it starts below this line, finishes above it. All right, I've talked about this already ad nauseum, but they were probably, what they would do with stocks that they thought were good buys at Renaissance Capital, they would find the trend, always an exponential trend, and then maybe, whatever they were doing, looking at the last year, last 6 months, and just seeing, are you above or under relative to the trend? And, how can we play that? They were stats, they were hardcore quants that were at Renaissance Capital, and Jim Simons, kind of a legend in the stock space, but in the mathematical world. He was a professor, I believe, before he went into finance. So again, the all-time exponential trend is not really going to help us right now. We're above it. But it's just to show you that that's what Apple does. Apple is a company, like all of the companies, they take debt. They grow their balance sheet. And so they grow like this. Now let's try to shoehorn in a power trend on Apple. Again, doesn't work. All right. Not only does it work, it's a less exciting growth rate. Right. So the power trend is $13, whereas the split adjusted history would take us to $258. Power trend's not even close, and that's 4.6% trailing 12 months, but that changes. All right, it's higher trailing 12-month growth before, smaller after. Apple is clearly not following a power trend; it follows an exponential trend. Let's look at another one, my favorite, old Cincinnati company, Procter. This channel's namesake comes from Procter Gamble. You never know how a company could take off in the 1800s from on the back of the hog industry. There's a trend since the 60s. I could go back further, but this is sort of a lot of the public databases have since the 60s. I could go back further. But anyway, the trend since the 60s is 12.4% CAGR. Sometimes it's above, sometimes it's below. Big drop here during the dot-com for them. And, since the global financial crisis and then after. Unfortunately, unlike Meta and Apple, instead of these guys, which are staying above the all-time trend, Procter is falling. So its trend in recent years would be shallower than a 12.4% CAGR. It'd be less, but it's still running exponentially. It's clear. It's obvious. 98% R squared. It's an exponential curve. Let's shoehorn a power on it. Doesn't make much sense. Okay. We go here, here. Expo trend is 227. We're quite a bit off it, only at 151 in price, but the power trend would show 35 bucks. Just doesn't make sense. And you can clearly see the farther we go out, a power trend doesn't make sense for a financial stock like P&G or any stock for that matter. All right. Already by here, we're 10x apart. 6 years out, we're 10x apart in the trends. So this stuff does matter as far as like measuring what something does, describing it in nature, what it does. Procter is an exponential curve. Apple is an exponential curve. Meta is an exponential curve. All right, they have different growth rates, but they're constant growth rates. Then, of course, we go back to our favorite chart. It clearly is a power trend. All right, let's take off some bands here. We can extend over it. We can fall below it. All right. But at the end of the day, it's around a power trend. I think it's pretty exciting because we keep bouncing around it. Again, I do not know the future. But let's just, again, play probabilistically. Let's look at the 4 to the 8, 40%. So 40% of the observations through the whole course of Bitcoin will fall between these bands, okay? Again, the trend was not as smooth back in the day. It looked more like this. It's always going to change a little bit. But as you can see from 2016, it smooths out quite nicely. And a beautiful view into the future. All right, we put the trend line itself on it all time. We can start to see where we are. I saw Tom Lee call for 250K in the next 80 days recently. We'll see. But as I've said, we haven't been through the full 4-year cycle yet, so let's not jump the gun that we won't have a pump. We'll keep going on power versus exponential here. This was a great one from APSK. Great follow if you don't. So he's got basically the max and the mins. He creates this cloud of the prior cycles, all right, where you're starting I actually forget how he does it because it's not exactly the halving, isn't it? Halving would be more here. So it's a little bit before the halving. It's probably roughly where the bottom is, turns out to be, before we move up to the top. But anyways, you see, we got a mean. We pump. Every time, 4 years, we pump. All right? And he has this great line, which I thought, maybe we don't go up and down the hill. We just tunnel straight through the hill. Totally possible. Totally possible. This is where we are now. Here's 2021. Confused a lot of people. Now, he gets these max and mins, of course, because this price wasn't 200,000 then. This is relative to the power curve. So it's going to be very exciting, I think, in the next 2 months when we actually, literally get to the min here. Are we just going to tunnel through, stay on the power curve? Or are we going to do some exciting pump? Let me go back to Apple. All right. So like I said, here's Apple on Expo versus Power, right? So if you were Jim Simons and his company, I imagine you'd do a lot more fancy stuff than this to see if you wanted to get in or out of a position. Clearly, the all-time trend was maybe more helpful here, even as a support. Not really matters here. So you have to think about your thesis, change it, whatever. Guys do, I'm sure, pretty complicated stuff. But just to show you another way to look at it is I did a short and a long-term trend. I've shown this before, but all right, so short-term trend I started like here, somewhere in 2004. When you can clearly see that obviously once jobs came in, we're on a different trajectory. Okay, but then let's look at the full trend, which I just showed you before. All right, so these will meet in the future. All right, so even we started from a lower base here. The trend is clearly, it's going to be faster here. So you just start to play around with, what that means. All right, you can, maybe like we do with Bitcoin, you can start to have some different bands. Again, this is not fully encompassing because obviously, look how fast the slope of this moves. It's like if we go back to the Bitcoin chart, right? See how the rainbow it's obviously smooth in the future when nobody knows. We just predict out. But in the past, as we evolve, it's pretty close. Looks pretty good. Less good here, right? But once we get to about 2016-ish, we really, overall, the curve stays like a rainbow as a power trend looks. So with Apple, we could, again, not being a applied statistician or whatever, just looking. The long-term data here is less useful, right? When Apple's doing new stuff in the 80s, 90s, and almost goes bankrupt, late 90s, job comes in. Obviously the evolving exponential trends kind of all over the map. But we could play with trend lines, say here, and then think about where to go. Now, I'm not even using those shorter term trends. I'm showing how it evolves, but not projecting out. So you can still see that there's like a kink here where it goes up and then just over. So it's not a great predictor. The point is you got to get more complicated with drawing these trend lines if you want to kind of see where the price could go. Maybe I'll try to do that more in the future. But Apple's actually growing faster in the last 20 years than it has overall. And you can see that, right? So overall, it grows like this. But then in the last 20 years, it's faster. It's growing faster. And then I just have it project out to the overall rate, but that's not correct, right? I mean, you can clearly see that we might even expect more out of Apple. So anyway, I just wanted to show that because these are two different completely entities, two different beasts. All right, stocks, Apple, doesn't matter, Procter, Meta, we can talk about anyone. You're going to get a straight line. Bitcoin is just different. You get these nice curves. This is linear, but if we go log, you do not get a straight line. I gotta bookmark more tweets because I saw some people even recently try to make these trends. Here's one. I mean, whatever. These channels, these straight line channels. Okay, and this is, I guess, linear in Tether. So they can work for some time, but obviously at some point they'll break and whatever. These are technical people, like to draw lines on charts. But just doing the math, like if you look at this one, for example, this is someone who's on log scale, tried to shoehorn in a straight line on TradingView just to sort of catch the top here, catches the bottom, seems like it might be good. This is irrelevant. This is honestly an irrelevant line. It's not going to, it had nothing to do with the cycle here. The funniest one was I saw someone do like a straight line here and a completely separate straight line here. I can't find it though, just to show it. It's sort of people that are locked in the world of exponential gains when Bitcoin doesn't do that. Like here's someone who's doing straight lines slowly over, starts to look more like a power. All right. The only way you can get a straight line is if you go log log. All right, so here's log and log. Power curves turn into straight lines. That's the only way you can get a straight line with a power regression. This is a great post by Stephen, Money or Debt. Just want to read it quickly because it's talking about energy and money. So many people have heard the Henry Ford quote about an energy money, and quite a few, the Fuller quote, which combines the concepts of energy-based money and a scientifically precise definition for the ledger. Fuller was off in his prediction from the 1960s by less than a decade when we would get to energy-based money. Few know about the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, Frederick Soddy, who pointed out in a monograph 100 years ago that real wealth is created by converting physical resources and energy into goods and services, which is constrained by the laws of thermodynamics, while money, virtual wealth, is not. Exponential growth, paper wealth, is not. This mismatch between the finite physical economy and the mathematically growing money supply is the root of economic instability. He believed an economy should be more closely tied to the real flows of energy and physical resources, not just monetary debt, to be more sustainable. All right, so here's what I've just been talking about. Monetary debt grows exponentially until something breaks. This has been the experience for millennia with jubilees, debt jubilees, and debasement, and debtors, prisons, and bankruptcies. Money defined by energy and with absolutely defined finite supply is more stable by design in the long run. There will still be loans and debts, which is actually an arguable point, but I tend to agree with him. But the system will be more equitable and more anti-fragile. The gigawattage and hash rate are up about 30% since May when I put this slide together, but the growth is based in reality, not in committees and tinkering, and manifests power laws. All right, so underlying the power laws of proof of work, energy is power times time. All right, doing the math with the hash rate here, or actually turning it into joules, which is energy. All right, and was there anything else I wanted to put on this slide? So yeah, Buckminster Fuller predicted this in the 60s, say by the year 2000, so he was less than a decade off. There'll be a realistic scientific accounting system. Wealth is not gold of pirates. Wealth is energy. Wealth always increases. So these are great follows. Stephen is a great follow if you don't follow him. He does a show with Giovanni. Really, really interesting stuff. And, putting a lot of the theory behind which I show you a lot just in numbers. But, that word stability, I think about a lot with Bitcoin, okay? Monetary debt grows exponentially until something breaks. Just how it works. It's not really a conspiracy. It's just math. Okay, so Facebook grows like this, also breaks a lot. Very unstable. Instability. Common. Same with Apple, Procter. We can try to time it in the shorter term. Again, this is for the quants on Wall Street, but it's harder. It's harder with exponential growth. You can really get rocked with some of these moves exponentially. Of course, you can get rocked with Bitcoin, but they come back just as quickly. And maybe we'll have softer cycles now. I'm not convinced of that just yet, but that's why I just keep coming back to this chart, because I think a lot of people, they still don't get what Bitcoin is doing. The key word with the power curve is it's sustainable. Okay, unlike just doubling every 10 years, which is what a 7.2% CAGR would do. Bitcoin slows down its growth to handle the proportionally larger system. And the number turns out to be 12.7% per every doubling, i.e., the price will double for every 12.7% increase in the life of Bitcoin. So it's proportional. And then you can find out that that's actually a power relationship when you go log-log. So here's log linear, which I show you all the time. Here's log-log. There's another one that I want to show from APSK. I got to chart this myself because it's a great one. I mean, it's pretty simple, but I haven't had it yet. So here's this is a good one. I got to get this set up in my engine. This is a drawdown from the local high. So wherever there was a high set in, obviously if it's making new highs, it's at zero. You're setting new highs, but Bitcoin's just been violent on some of the drawdowns. All right, so 2012, 90%. 2013 actually, well, you have to wait till 2015. All right, so 80% after the 2013 top. After the 2017 top, you go into 2019, you're getting back to 80%, so it matched. And then last cycle was a little bit less, 75%. I've seen a lot of analysts thinking still in exponential terms who are trying to draw weird lines with what Bitcoin's doing and saying this is like going back to 95% fall. It could happen. Anything can happen. But this seems, if I was going to draw a trend line on this, these are higher lows, less drops, less extreme drops, clearly. It could happen that we have like a 95% drop for some weird reason, but you have to think about what is happening here. All right, so like it's not just that these are lower lows. It's that when Bitcoin was this young, the system was way more violent as far as how it would grow. Okay, so let's go back here. Here's the 12.7%. You can find it on my website. Good morning, NYC Hodl. Good morning. So here, if we go back to 2012, all right, the trend would double in less than half a year. It's actually growing 431% a year. So it's extremely volatile right here. But as we move out to say here in 2023, which we hit those lows, right? When old Silicon Valley Bank and everything, where is it? Here. All right. We were at this point at about a 49% trend, roughly. All right, or doubling every 1.7 years. Okay, so it takes longer to double. That's what the curve is doing. There's just nothing else like this in finance. It's very, very unique, which makes it very, very interesting. I only got 3 for you today in TradFi, but Meta, Apple, Procter. By the way, Meta and Apple are a hell of a trend, right? Even if you take the full trend, right? So Apple, like I said, is growing faster than this because it starts here and finishes here. Starts below the green line, finishes above the green line. That means it's moving faster than 21% CAGR. I think it's like 24%, right? We've talked about that. That's super fast. It's one of the best stocks of the last quarter century for obvious reasons. But Bitcoin is still growing way faster, 42% per year on the trend. But it will slow. It will slowly slow. Here's how it slows, the trend's slowing rate. So next year, this year it's slowed down. By the end of this year, it's going to be 7.5% less growth than last year. 6.7% the year after that, 6.3, 5.6. By the way, I think someone might have asked me this. I got to find it in the comments. Notice how this is not always going down. It's because of rounding on the days here. So it's very sensitive. At any time, the curve is doing. It's doubling every additional 12.7% in Bitcoin's life. Okay, so again, when Bitcoin was 600 days old, it would take 72 days to double when it was 640 days old. Now we're 6,000 days old. So it's going to take 700 days to double. The numbers aren't perfect, just it's because of rounding when I picked the doubling. That's it. So that's why you get slightly different trend slowing rates. I just thought of this. I think I need to respond to a comment someone said about this, but it's just rounding. But generally, you can see that. Okay, so next year, when we finish next year, it'll be 6.7% slower growth than this year, and down we go. All right. Again, with these slight blips are just rounding because it's picking different. It can't pick the exact number because I'm doing daily snapshots. An exponential trend, if I was going to table out how an exponential chart would work, this would be zero. It would not slow. And this would be constant. It would double at the same rate every time. And this would also be the same thing. So there would be no change here. It'd just be 22%, 23.1% all the way down the table. So this, I continue to believe, throws off like massive amounts of analysts who try to do straight lines. There's a great one I just cannot find, but like something like this. All these triangles, all this stuff. It might work in the short term for some things, but you need to find someone who draws a straight line over the long term, like this. Way wrong. Straight line on log linear, by the way. It is badass. It really is. Yeah, I know. He got completely roped in by clients that, want a product. You can't say no to clients, even though he's doing his damnedest to protect the banking system. I just saw some hilarious pictures of this, which just I cannot find them again. But if you see a long enough time frame and someone's doing a channel like this, it's just wrong. It's not gonna get you very far. think I had one saved. Let's see. Yeah, I'll try to find more, but ping me links if you see. There's some wild ones on Twitter. I just don't save the ones that I see. I can never find it again. You know, if you see the gentle curve though, the rainbow, it's correct. Here's another. Oh, I just realized this is blocked from my picture, isn't it? Sorry. Whatever. I think you get the gist. Here's another. This one's back from 2021. Let's see if we can. This is just meaningless. This is a completely meaningless chart. This channel has nothing to do with what Bitcoin is doing. It's just people used to drawing straight line channels because that's how everything looks in the TradFi world. You know, one way to track how good a stock is on a trend is probably to just draw it back from today, but then run an R squared and see how you know, what's the best R squared. So over the lifetime, we got 98%, but I bet you could get a 99 and change on, you know, Procter from here after the GFs or after the .com. Start a little bit higher, finish a little bit lower than this. It'd probably be something like a 99% R squared. And then you just keep measuring it from there. Measure the deviations, do this and that. That's what people are used to doing in the. And I speak again not as being a chartist, a TA person. It's just you cannot shoehorn that around Bitcoin. Let me show you another one in case some of you checking in that haven't seen this other chart before that I've done. Yeah, yeah, he's a good marketer for the coin in the bustling city. Yes, it is. So here's the opposite. I've shown this many times, but here's the opposite of the chart that I just showed you for all the stocks. All right, so I just showed you the stocks. They run on the green line. Let's look at Bitcoin. It clearly runs on the black line. All right, 96% R squared. Just does not, you cannot do channels, straight line channels over the long term to make any sense of it. You cannot. Now let's try to shoehorn in an exponential. All right, I've shown this many times. It's way off. You know, it kind of like from here would be good, but again, you missed the first few years of data almost completely. And it almost seems like a good balance here, here, but then from here, useless. And this difference, since Bitcoin has such fast growth, gets pretty wacky pretty quick. All right, so even as of today, we're a factor of 6x off. All right, Bitcoin again, as usual, well, not as usual, but it is right on trend. 5, 6x off the exponential, which Plan B still says we're on. And we get to 10x by only, a year from now, half a year from now. So if you just run the math, you will see the difference is stark. And then, by the way, I've experimented. Right, we talked about this. Maybe Bitcoin sort of gets captured, becomes the asset that everybody holds, but not everybody controls. So governments control a lot of Bitcoin. They kind of do to Bitcoin what they did to gold. It's possible that at some point Bitcoin could go exponential, but at a much lower growth rate than the all-time shoehorned exponential, right? Just we're nowhere on this green trend, but maybe it turns into a straight line later. But I hope not, because I think that shows sort of weakness for the system. This is Bitcoin being pulled into an exponential curve, backed by a lot of debt, a lot of collateral, a lot of interest, a lot of fiat interest chasing those scarce Bitcoins. So this is the more important or interesting midterm question. Is Bitcoin going to stay power, or will it maybe turn into exponential because there's so much debt chasing it? I guess I should rework this. You know, I can start showing you expo stocks that move in, and we can see how far off they are from the trend lines. But this isn't the right one. This is just sort of showing you how it evolves, and it's clearly faster at the moment than what the all-time would project, which is all the way back here. Anyway. Had to show this one. I've seen a lot. I've seen some unbelievable tweets from Russians as their leaders take them, out of their hellscape country and to try to invade Ukraine. This is a real one. Soldier calls his mother, tells him he's captured in Ukraine. Where? Buy dollars. This is the state of the world we still live in. There's a lot of people that are in a much worse hellscape. Thankfully, I'm not in. But if you still think that this country is going to try to take over a free Ukraine, you're probably watching too much Elon Musk tweets. Why not buy Bitcoin? Because we're way early still. Just mostly what I wanted to show today. I'm excited to show you guys more TradFi stuff. We'll get some market caps. We'll look at different things here with the TradFi metrics. One more I wanted to show. So here's the growth rate goes down, right, on a trend. Right? It was like 1,000% 15 years ago. It's going down somewhere. I think within 10 years, it's going to seriously be something interesting will happen because remember the S&P on a trend does like 11-12% right now. Add 2% for dividends reinvested, that's 13-14%. Bitcoin's going to take till 2070 to get to 10, but you know the nexus will be sooner than that. You know, by 2035 it will fall. The growth rate will only be 24%. So this is where we're going to really see, like, is Bitcoin just going to kind of fall prey to what gold fell to and just sort of mirror the terrible exponential financial system, like maybe here? All right, so it goes on a power trend until here, then it straightens out. I know it looks better for holders for price, but that's not a better world, right? It's still a lot of debt that's wrapped up behind this number, a lot of inflation. Or does everybody get wise to this and everybody starts to hold Bitcoin and maybe stock prices start to have these gently sloping, declining growth rates? And maybe things start to get denominated in Satoshis and maybe people aren't taking nearly as much debt. These questions will be answered, I think, within the next 15 years for sure, but probably within the next 10 years. Let me show you. I'll chart it just to be specific here. One second. Sad truth, I think. All right, it's coming. So here I'm trying to graph out what I just showed you. Right, so in reality, Bitcoin's trailing 12-month return is super volatile. Right, it can go up like that, massive, thousands of percent, go down, negative, up, hundreds of percent, down. So here's the actual, but you can do it on a curve, which is simply just taking the trailing 12 of the power curve. All right. This is, notice the 953 right there? That is what you see here. All right. So let's go back. Right on the day. There it is, 950. Okay, but then we chart this out. So we're not as early as, you know, the fun days were coming in 2010, 11, 12 for sure, which I missed. But everybody gets the price they deserve. I was definitely hearing about it at this time. And so we're going to finish off the year, as I said, at 42%. But we'll fall. The slope of that curve, still great prices, right? But the slope of that growth will fall. And so if you look at 10 years out, we're down to 25% CAGR, or 25% trailing 12-month, basically. by this point, the stock market will also be up to there. Because remember, I said it's right now, today, the curve is since 2008's trend, which is pretty good R squared. It's roughly at 12 to 14% dividends reinvested. That will increase because they keep printing money, and also we have advancements like AI. So at some point, these things will cross. They're just going to cross. So at that point, the question will be, okay, well, Bitcoin, obviously, Bitcoin's a great asset, so we don't want it to go down. We don't want it to be worse than the stock market. So then it'll be something like this. Like this, where the trend turns into Expo. The power trend turns into a straight line. Or Bitcoin pulls the TradFi system power. I don't have a good view on it yet. What could happen? Thanks for the repost. Ghost in the 90s. But I think 10 years will be the... If you think about how crazy this last decade has been, we're going to see where it all goes in 10 years. By the way, stock to flow is not happening. All right. These curves were made with exponential coefficients, i.e. gold and silver growth rates, which are exponential curves. It has nothing to do with the power curve, as I've tried to explain. So this is why they look goofy. They're not scale invariant. It's not like a nice curve like here. Not happening. Even as 2019, which is closer. Right. These are 5 sigma levels. I mean, 99.9 percentile, getting up to 780K by the end of the year. Maybe back here we could hit it, but it's hardly a representation of what Bitcoin is doing. We got poor Russians invading Ukraine, Tucker Carlson cheering them on, and the mothers of those soldiers tell them to buy dollars when they're in Ukraine. I think that's all I have today, guys. Very keen to see how this fall progresses with you all. I think what I'll try to do to explain a little bit more how I imagine. Again, I don't know anybody on the ground there, but people like true quant firms like Renaissance. You just got to measure. You got to take much shorter curves to try to see where you can get those applied statistics if the price is over or under trend. But I imagine that's what Jim Simons was doing when he was alive. Even the 2020 curve, you can see is different on log scale than pre-2020. So here it makes sense to draw straight lines on log scale and play around with different levels, whatever, do your technical analysis. Although I would still prefer the math trend line analysis with actual, percentiles, not just lines on charts with wicks. But this is a hell of a trend line. And very interesting. We may, oops, not this one. We may tunnel through it. This is where we're down to crunch time. We may, or maybe we go to where Tom Lee said, 250K by 80 days out. Have to see. Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. I got more to come on there. Their story. Yeah, he's a great man. Really successful, but super smart, super kind, as far as I know, and a lot of very interesting. He was there for a lot of very interesting physics breakthroughs too. Like, you can look at the history of string theory, and he's involved. Like, he's just there with some calculations. Super smart, applied scientist, applied statistician. It's kind of like what Adam Back does for Bitcoin, applying the cryptography. And of course, Adam's great on a lot of financialization of it too, but Simons was really applying his craft to the markets. It'd be interesting to hear what he would think about Bitcoin growing this way. I'll leave you guys with this again for fun. You can see it right here in APSK's chart, but right, however he's doing these, I think he's more going from the base. He's taking like the 5th percentile and just running it as off of that, which looks pretty good. This is slightly different. I run it off the evolving trend, which is here. All right, wherever it is at any given time. And as you see, the evolving trend, it's more wobbly at the beginning, but it comes into the rainbow quite nicely. So there has not been a cycle where we've missed the 9. So that's where it almost gets us exactly to that magical number. 250, 2x the trend. Whoops, you need to see the trend because the evolving stops. There you go. By the end of the year. Super simple math. Very basic 4-year cycle. We don't know it will repeat, but let's not say it won't until it hasn't. So I think that's it for me, guys. A couple exciting months coming up here. Thank you for watching, as always. Thank you for indulging my support of Ukraine, and hope you guys do as well. The Russians are searching for dollars. I would search for Bitcoin. All right. Have a great week, everybody.